Okay, is that better? Yes. Okay. So, I'm Ryan. This is Stuff About Me. We're going to be talking about what happens when we try to use Metasploit and then things don't go well. So, Metasploit's a helpful pen testing tool, but AV is getting better at picking up stuff. So, we're going to figure out how to do some AV bypass and some other ways to get shells when Metasploit's just not doing it. So, why do we use Metasploit? It's useful for pen testing. It's got a lot of modules with it. Interpreter facilitates a lot of things, including getting pieces of data out of memory very easily. AV companies are aware of this, and even though Metasploit is generally mostly a white hat tool, it turns out that like APT1 uses it too. So I guess maybe that's important to pick up. But we still want shells, and since APT1 is successful, we should be too. So what do we do? And hopefully, if you're interested in that, you're in the right place to find out. So we're going to talk for a minute about what Metasploit and Interpreter are. And then we're going to talk about encoding payloads for AV evasion. How many people here have used WinExe or SMB WinExe? Okay, good. So a couple people, and this is like one of the tools that I use all the time. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about disabling AV. Executing payloads in memory, and also just getting shells through SQL Server. So this is pretty much all going to be hands-on demos, and some stuff is going to work and some stuff isn't. So I'm going to kind of show sort of the traditional, like, how you progress through levels of frustration until you finally say screw it and just start doing the things that are most effective and passing them along. The problem is you sort of have to do this for each individual test that you go on, since your IPs change as you go from test to test. So you can't just build like a magical interpreter. So for those that aren't familiar, which if you don't know by the end of like this conference, you're probably in trouble. But so Metasploit is a pen testing exploit development framework, and the reason that it is a framework is it has something for everybody. So sysadmins, lots of tools in there to help them find out whether or not things are vulnerable. There's auxiliary stuff, which does everything from scanning and enumeration. There's also admin things in there. So for instance, if you want to set up TFTP client, stuff like that, there's all that sort of stuff in the auxiliary. Exploit is obviously to pwn things. And then post modules help you get data off the system. So everything from dumping memory of processes to dumping hashes, all that stuff. Interpreter is a specialized shell. It used to just be Windows. They've sort of ported it for some other platforms. But what's cool about it is it uses DLL injection. And so in a lot of cases when you're using Interpreter, there's no actual files that land on the system, so you don't have to worry about cleaning stuff up. And so we're actually going to look at this. Sort of my goal as a pen tester is never to leave anything behind. So I'm going to talk about some different ways to do that. Also, it allows for, again, traffic routing, stuff like that. So if you want to pivot from one network to the next, and if you did anything with the CTF, you know, some of that stuff would be helpful for things like getting to the scanner. So the main things that we're going to talk about are MSF payload, which generates payloads, MSF encode, which encodes them. And if you saw Matt's talk, you know, the MSF encode is one of the things that he mentioned. Also, UPX is a packer. It shrinks down binaries. And it turns out that like sometimes that's enough to get by AV. So UPX is getting picked up more places now. But one of the things that I do with a lot of my tools, if they get picked up by AV first, I will UPX pack them, and then they won't. So we'll look at some of that in just a second. So I'm also going to be talking about using shares. And one of the nice things about that is you don't have to worry about actually uploading binaries. So one of the things that I have been doing a lot more often is generating scripts to go from box to box to get data off them. And so this way you can generate a script, and instead of having to worry about uploading things, you can reference your own share and just run commands against box after box, referencing files that are on your share. And you can even, if you feel brave, make it writable so that you can log everything back there, and you never actually have to really pay that much attention to what's going on. So it's also an easy place to store stuff so that it's accessible any place in the network. So we're going to look at that in just a second. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was, first of all, getting access to systems. So let me make that big again. So for a lot of the tests that I've been going on lately, it used to be a couple years ago that anytime you landed on a network, you were guaranteed to see MSA08, 067, or maybe even some stuff back to 03 that was laying around. And more networks, now that they've been through more and more pen tests, are having additional resources put into things like internal vulnerability scanning. So we're seeing more and more areas where configuration weaknesses are the primary path in instead of exploits. So one of the things I wanted to show you guys first is Responder, which has become part of the sort of arsenal that we use for a lot of our internal pen tests. And the goal with Responder is leveraging two different protocols that Windows uses to help resolve names. And these are on by default in most environments. And one is NetBIOS name resolution. And so basically what happens is if you search for a host name that doesn't exist, it'll first check DNS, and DNS will go, oh, I don't know about that. And so then it will go back and look at your local network and send out a broadcast and say, hey, anybody got this? And it turns out that anybody on your network can answer that, whether it's theirs or not. So we sort of we're very friendly. And if somebody says, I'm looking for something that doesn't exist, we're like, hey, I'll help you out with that. Come see what I got. So we do this for both NetBIOS and for a newer protocol, which is the link local multicast name resolution, which basically sends it out to even broader audience. So basically what Responder is going to do is we're going to set it up, and for anybody that puts one of those requests out to the network, we're going to answer it. And then because we're on the same local network as our target is, then they'll go ahead and send us their NTLM v2 hashes, which we can then crack to turn back into usable passwords. So the way that this normally works in a pen test is we start off, we run Responder, we get a hash, we crack it, and then we use that to log into a resource. So we're going to cd into the Responder directory. So Responder is on GitHub. And so if you search for Responder, you can just git clone it, and it works great by default and backtrack. So we look at our IP address. And we specify our IP address. And so it says everything's running. So this is going to run an SMB server, a SQL server, a web server. And so basically, as people are searching for things using everything from FTP to try to finding a Windows share, when they look for something on the network and they come to us, we try to have something that can answer them and that they can type credentials into. So also, I'm pretty conversational. I think so. Probably not. No, it's not. Thank you. I should have brought alcohol, I guess. Sorry about that. So now we should be good. We'll go back to our Windows box, and I love the love. So now we'll try to connect to something that doesn't exist. So try to connect to la. It says permissions denied. When we come back to here, we can see that there's now a hash. So this is not the right user. So we're going to log into the right user. I'll put that back up for you later. Let's try this one. This one's hopefully, never mind. that should be no password. So I think we're good. So let's try that again. All right, so permission denied again. Okay, so that's better. Demo 1 user. So we copy our password. And then we can use John. And so the super secure password is demo 1. So now, without actually having to compromise machine, we now have a password for it. So next thing we want to do is, how many people have used the PSExec module within Metasploit? Okay, so that's another one that I use all the time. So, okay.
So how do you convince somebody to go and look for something?
It turns out that people are crappy typers. You don't really have to try real hard. So usually from the time that I start this up, there's a combination of, a couple things go on. One is people run scripts as services on their machines and then never update them. So they're still looking for that server that existed back in like 92. And so, of course, hopefully it's not on the network anymore, but sometimes they are. And so when they try to go to that box, it doesn't exist, so it'll send out the broadcast and won't answer it. Also, like old AV servers, so they've switched from Symantec to McAfee, and so now the boxes are actually going up looking for AV updates locally, and I actually see a bunch of those, and so we pretend to be the AV server, and they'll just give us their hashes. Well, that would obviously be a great next step. I'll recommend that to the guys at Right Responder, is to just pass the AV signatures for those things that are searching. That'd be a great AV bypass. So, I did. But I can't write a loop, so that's the bad part. So, really, for the most part, people will come to you. And from the time that I run this on the network, it takes anywhere from like under a second to maybe 5 minutes for people to start making typos. And so a lot of the times I'll bring this up while I'm doing other stuff. The first thing when I do when I start on a pen test is I'll start listening on the local network just to see what broadcast protocols are there and what sort of stuff is there. And if I see at least a couple NetBIOS packets go by, I'll start up Responder right away. And then while I'm doing port scans or other stuff, this will be running in the background collecting creds so that when I actually am ready to start hacking stuff, it's there. So PSExec takes basically the remote host, the domain, username, and password. So you can come back over here, demo 1, and this will tell you where it got it from. So 192.168.192.150, and I'll copy that so I don't fat finger again. And so all the demos are live, so there's going to be mess ups, so you can enjoy them with me. So then from here, we want to specify our interpreter payload. And we specify RIP for lhost. And exploit. And so this is going to fail. Okay, so the username and password was successful, but that is full suck. So obviously we're in trouble here. So we know this, so we can try to do a couple things. One of the things that will work on some systems is turning off AV. So PSExec is still usually pretty reliable for this sort of stuff. So let's take a look at using this for PSExec. So for SMB Win exe on backtrack, we can copy the path to this, and we specify our user as demo1 and then the % of the password. And for here, we want to do system and uninstall. And so the reason we do system and uninstall, system, obviously we want to elevate privileges if we can. Since this is going to be running as a service, it's better off that we just go ahead and escalate through that. But we also want it to uninstall when we leave. And the reason we want it to uninstall when we leave is because our goal is, again, not to leave anything laying around. So, and so here we go back and do, I think that was right, and command.exe. So now we have a command shell. So now we can do other stuff. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time with is Windows command shell. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at processes. One is scquery to look at the services that are running. So we may want to look to see here what type of AV is in use. So we can use find, and so it's using Microsoft anti-malware service. So we can do scquery, and we can go back up, and we can find the anti-malware service under IMS. So, okay, we can try to kill this. We can see how that goes. There's no backspace, so yeah, I'm a really bad typer. So, okay, that was full of fail. So we can also look at the task list and see if we can find a task there that we can kill. So let's go ahead and do a WMIC process list. And WMIC process list will give us full paths to the processes. So we wanted to look for, say, Microsoft stuff. That'd be easy to do. If we can type. So we can see Microsoft Windows Enterprise here. So let's try. Okay, so there's the find process that we just used. We can also see arguments that are passed to it. So we can see here that we have a Microsoft Security Essentials process. So we'll go ahead and look at that, and we'll see if we can kill it. So we can do so that worked. Let's try again. And then if that doesn't work, we'll try another one. Okay, so that wasn't the one. So we can come back and we can look for other processes. And so this is sometimes effective and sometimes not. But for a lot of antiviruses, for instance, Symantec, as long as there's no other pieces to it, pretty easy to kill. AVG, also pretty easy to kill. Usually when you see stuff more integrated to the operating system or with more products together, they're harder. So that one's denied. That is the actual scanning engine, and so that didn't work. So let's look at some other options for things that we can do. So we can try to encode stuff, which we'll encode stuff. And then we're going to use an encryptor to encrypt it called Hyperion. And what this will do is it actually uses a random key, and we'll use that random key to encrypt it, and it actually brute forces that key when it runs. So it does a couple things. If you remember from Matt's talk, one of the things he talked about is adding in a loop to slow stuff down, increases evasion. By doing the decryption, it also adds to more time, so it doesn't actually see that stuff hit memory. But again, this is something else that right now it's not being picked up, but it may be picked up in the future. So right now this is effective. We'll see how effective it is in a couple months. So let's work on going ahead and creating a binary. So we want to use MSF payload and create a Windows Meterpreter reverse TCP. We need to set our L host to our IP address and our L port to a good L port, which I always use 8675 because it's the number Jenny calls on. And so we're going to make this raw, and we're going to pass this to MSF encode as type exe and redirect this to msf.exe. So This will take a second to encode. Basically, this uses the Shikai guide awesome that Matt was talking about. The Shikai guide is the default encoder. So we'll try encoding it, we'll see. Sometimes this will end up being enough to evade AV, sometimes it isn't. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move the MSF to, I put all my stuff in var dub, and that way I can either have a web server, or I also set up Samba to export that same directory. And so that way when I put files there, if I need to fetch them via the web, I can fetch them via the web, or if I want to get to them via SMB, I can do that as well. But basically I come down here in the Samba conf file, and I copy the printer config. So here you see the printers, and so I basically created something that looked just about exactly like it. So path is var dub, it's browsable, read only, and guest OK. So we'll start up Samba. And then we can come back to our shell, and next thing we need to do is start a listener in Metasploit. So and so now we've set our L host and our L port. We want to set a couple other things. We want to set the exit on session to false, and that means that this will keep running in the background, and as more sessions come in, basically we can have as many Metasploit sessions as we want coming in. And so then we exploit-j to start it in the background. So now we have a listener for stuff to come back in. So we come back here, and so we try to run this, and access is denied. So from here, we have a couple other things we could do. We can use other templates, but one of the things that has been, I found pretty effective, is using the Hyperion tool to encrypt it. So we can do wine Hyperion, the try this again. Let's figure out what's wrong with this. Let's go back into the Hyperion directory. Okay, that's better. So now we have an encrypted interpreter binary. So we can come back in here. So we see that it completed here. Then we go back to Metasploit. We see sending stage, and so now we have an interpreter session. So we were able to evade the AV by going through and encrypting that, and turns out it's pretty successful. So one of the things that we want to do for a lot of these is actually, once they're loaded, migrate out. So another thing that we can set is set it to auto migrate when it's finished. So WinExe, like I said, we can do this with patch the hash as well. So another way that we use this is once you actually get on a box and you do a hash dump, we will go through, we'll grab the administrator password. And how many people have used Medusa before? Okay, so Medusa is an awesome tool. Basically, what you can do is you can give it a hash. It will try that hash against large numbers of boxes. So once we've compromised one box, we'll take the local administrator password. A lot of companies will use the same administrator password on every workstation. So we'll use Medusa, we'll go through, we'll figure out which machines that'll work on. We'll go back and we'll use WinExe, and we'll launch our Metasploit payload against all of those boxes. So all those shells will come in. Then from there, we can do things like set auto runs in Metasploit to run a series of different scripts on them, so that we can do things like automatically dump hashes and that sort of stuff directly from there. So we already talked about that. So executing payloads in memory. So sometimes we just hit problems where this just is too hard. So one of the things that we can do is we can use a program called CodeExec, which will let us run the stuff directly from memory, so the Metasploit shellcode isn't actually ever on disk. So to do that, we're going to use a tool called CodeExec, which will be called sce.32.exe. And so the only thing that will maybe catch us in this case is if you have a network AV component. And if you have a network AV component, as Matt mentioned in his talk, one of the things that you can do is enable stage encoding, which will stop that. So let's take a look at that one. So I already have sce.32.exe here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use MSF payload, and we're going to do reverse TCP again. We're going to set our L port back to 8675, our L host to do raw. We're going to go ahead and use the same MSF encoder, and we're going to use the alpha mixed encoder for this. So what this is going to do is basically give us alphanumeric string. And so the alpha encoder is useful for a couple different places. One is if you're doing FTP exploits. Obviously there's nulls, new lines, all that sort of stuff is really important in FTP because it denotes things like end of command. And so alpha characters are a lot. Let's try this again. So the alpha is really useful for those sort of things. But also if you need to copy and paste shellcode from one command to another, it also makes it easy for that. So here we have a set of shellcode that we can use. So we'll copy this, come back here, and here we have interpreter session back open again. So by executing through memory, we can get past AV. Oh, so also for reference, the target that we're working on is a Windows 7 box that I accidentally updated this morning with Security Essentials that was also accidentally updated this morning. So this is today's AV signatures and today's patches that we're playing around with. So in case you're curious about how practical this actually is. So as of right now, Microsoft Security Essentials is actually also one of the tougher ones to get by in a lot of situations. They're doing a good job with picking stuff up. So a lot of this stuff, just encoding the interpreter payload will be sufficient. And then some of them, you'll actually have to go back through and do some of these tricks. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was getting shells through SQL. So how many people have messed around with the XP command shell in MS SQL? Okay, so there's a couple people. So Windows is awesome. They thought that one of the things you really needed in a database was the ability to execute commands. So this has been for forever that they have thought that this was a good plan. And it's still there, I guess, because you don't want your dumb stuff to still be, to not be backward compatible. To make sure that everybody can still do dumb stuff, XP command shell is still in the latest Microsoft SQL version. So this is going to be the latest SQL Server Express. And XP command shell will let you shell out commands. Now, by default, it's disabled. But luckily, through SQL injection, we can re-enable it. So, like for external tests, this is especially handy. Unless you actually delete the DLL, just turning it off isn't sufficient. So through a lot of the external tests that we do when we find SQL injection, it's easy enough just to turn it back on, and then we can do things like download binaries or run commands on the web server's behalf. Which is also why you are on the SQL server's behalf, which is also why you never want to run your SQL server as system, which they've gotten better about that, but some people are like, no, we should fix that because that's different from the last version. So when you're copying and pasting your configs from other like broken crap, make sure that you update them so that they're using stronger permissions than the old stuff was using. So we're going to use this to execute our payload through XP command shell, and we can also use this to run the same SC commands. So one of the things that you may want to do is build yourself up a list of your favorite AVs that you can disable, and then basically you can just run these commands in bulk and try to get rid of your AV this way. So since this is sort of talking about a little bit about Metasploit, one of the things that Metasploit has in it is MS SQL client. So we're going to assume that we have gotten somebody to give us a password through Responder for SQL, and so we now have a password to the database. Like I said, this would also work over SQL injection, so this will work in a number of different ways. So we're going to use the aux admin MS SQL SQL command. And so we are going to set our host to, and let's figure out what port that is on that box. So the mmap-a, one of the things that Windows is also nice about is telling you for SQL servers that are started what port they're on. So the -a command for nmap doesn't show you all of the ports on a box. It only shows you the most common ports. So one of the things to take note is just because you can't see that there's a SQL port open, pay attention to your the scripts that run as part of nmap. The NSEs will often tell you where the SQL server is, even if you weren't aware. Okay, so that'll take a second, but I'm going to cheat. Okay. So, in case you also didn't know it, there's a history file in your .msf4 directory. So we can just copy all this stuff over and use it here, with the one difference being that. So here, and that's not the right address. So we have our rhost set, we have our password set, our SA. We want to just see whether or not this works. Fail. Yeah. Let's try that again. Okay, so now we have that. So one of the things that I've also done is, how many people here have used resource files for Metasploit? So resource files are also very handy. So I created two. One is called disable XP command shell, which basically use this. We want enable XP command shell. Wow. So the things that we have to do are we have to run spconfigure show advanced options, run reconfigure, enable XP command shell, reconfigure, and then at the end I do an ipconfig to make sure it works. So back in Metasploit, make sure I'm in the right directory, and do enable XP command shell, and it'll run through, and then at the end, I can see IP address stuff. So that was effective. We were able to turn it on there. And so then from here, all I have to do is set the SQL statement to oh, yeah, that's the other one. Backspaces, or the backslashes, are escape characters, and so we need to make sure that we have enough of them to do the right thing. So you actually double up on them here for everything you do. And apparently still not enough. Yep, probably. Aren't live demos awesome? So, still not there. Oh, that's why. That's right the first time. Nothing to see here. So anyway, type better than me. That's the key here. So now we should see stage sending. And so now we were able to run our UNC path over SQL. So a lot of the time I've been seeing people starting to move towards disabling SMB because they're tired of pen testers popping stuff via SMB. But luckily, like when you have heavy dev workshops, everybody apparently needs SQL on their desktop. So since everybody needs SQL on their desktop and they pick universally crappy passwords across applications, so I'll see a lot now where I end up going through this and manage to compromise lots of machines through SQL. So one of the things is obviously we don't want to leave it broken since we just made it less secure. So the other script that I wrote for the other half of this is the disable XP command shell, which basically does the exact same thing we did before in reverse to make sure that it's actually off. So, and so we see at the bottom that it actually failed the final one. So, I was going to do one more and see if I can find the other one. The other one I was going to do was pass the hash. So we can take one of these. So we can run the post Windows gather smart hash dump, which will get us the actual hashes from this box. So sometimes we'll see where we have a user that has more advanced credentials that is on the same box, or the user that we're able to get into the box on isn't an admin user on every box. Do it to a chief. So one of the things we'll want to do here is we can use, say, we'll use our demo 1 user. We'll copy their hash here. And for WinExe, we can set the SMB hash to be that hash. And so now, since we don't actually have to know what the username and password is, we can actually use SMB, the SMB WinExec. We can put anything we want to for the password. And oh yeah, Unix is hard. Let's export that instead of just setting it. That's better. So now you actually are in an word system on the box. So another tool that I wanted to talk to you guys about, how many people have used GSEC dump? So GSEC dump actually appeared in the apt1 report as well, because apparently the Chinese know it's awesome too. But what it will do is it will actually give you some of the credentials that are in memory. So I think it's still in. It is part of, it is not open source, but it is freely available. So here we have GSEC dump. So I will usually copy GSEC dump because I can't type very well to gs.exe. I'll UPX that up because it helps with the evasion. And then so we see a couple of things here. We see all of the hashes that we had from before, so you can get all your pictures in. But it will also show you different things from memory. So if you have credentials that have stuff in memory, it will list them here. But this is one of the cool parts. So if you have passwords that are shorter than 16 characters and they're in memory, which apparently that one is not shorter, so it will actually give you the LM equivalent. So now you have, for people that are logged in, if you actually want their password to use for stuff, it's now attackable with rainbow tables. So this is another trick to help elevate faster. Also, for a number of different things that will show credentials that are in memory in plain text up in this area. So as you're looking through, if people have remote desktop connections open to different boxes, and for instance, their workstation systems, a lot of the times you'll be able to pull the passwords directly out of memory. And so GSEC dump is one of my favorites. Also for domain controllers, it will pull password histories as well. So if you want better crack lists over time, by pulling domain histories as well, you'll be able to get a lot closer to getting all of the passwords that people have used within the domain. So the other thing I've noticed is that people will tend to use variations on passwords that they've used in the past. So if they have one password that was harder and one password that was easier, they'll you may be able to get their harder password based off rule sets when password cracking from their easier password. So that was the bulk of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. So that's contact info. Do people have questions about anything? Okay, cool. Thank you very much.